Welcome back to Strange Form. Today we are going to be doing something a little different. Rather than reviewing a figure, I'm going to be tearing one apart, literally. Namely, the MEZCO 1/12 Alien Big Chap. In my first video review of this figure, I was singing its praises, but that was before it developed a fatal flaw which made it entirely unusable. Fortunately, Big Bad Toy Store was gracious enough to send me a new figure and allow me to keep this one to inspect where the issue developed. As you can see here, most of the articulation is performing exactly how you would expect. The arms and right leg are holding position, with little to no drift, but not his left leg. Any attempt to move it causes it to spring back into its neutral position. And it should be noted that the neutral position of this rubber mold is spread eagle rather than standing. I think they did this in the hopes that the crotch would not rip over time, which makes me wonder if eventually the hips are going to become a weak spot and split if you display him legs together. Since I'm going to be tearing this thing apart, I think I'll also take the carapace off and see if the dome can't be dremeled down to get rid of the tabs, especially the one in the nose, and get it to follow the contour of the upper lip tube more accurately. Now, where to start? Well, first I think I'm going to pop off the foot and see if I can push the ankle up to get a better look at the kind of armature that's underneath. It's a standard ball joint, but there's a lot of resistance on the cuff at the ankle, which feels like the rubber is somehow attached to the inner skeleton. So what do I use to slice this open? Nope, not this. Definitely not. Not this one either. No. Maybe. No. This. A good old-fashioned modeler's X-Acto knife. Perfect. Now, where to cut? I think I will slice right at the problem spot. The first thing I'm noticing, the paint is starting to wear off in certain spots, and the rubber is starting to take a dull sheen. You can also see here that the rubber is actually intruding into the armature, which means that when you twist the figure, you are stressing the inside of the rubber. My first thought about this brown discoloring around the screw is that it's rust, but it can't be, as I can't see them using anything other than stainless steel for this figure. So I think that it's more likely industrial thread lock. Now, with the rubber completely removed, the legs swing freely as there is no tension on the screw. Absolutely none at all. It's interesting that you can see the rubber has seeped into every nook and cranny of the armature. On the back, you can see that the screw goes through the hip joint and fastens to a nut, which unfortunately is not recessed in any way, so the nut can easily work its way off the screw inside of the mold. And here is where I think the failure occurred. But before we get into that, I wanted to show you all how the ratchet joints work and why you should be careful with it. Though there is some tactile feedback, this isn't a true ratchet joint, but rather more of a friction piece, and you can already see that the grooved metal to create that friction has started to wear down. This is only within an hour's worth of use. It works by inserting the post into the two separate upper arm pieces, and then a free-floating cuff is pulled down and placed over it. I'm guessing that their hope was that the rubber fills the space between the two arm parts, and the expansion will keep the cuff in place. So if your figure's arms or legs start to lose that feedback, either the cuff has slipped up a little bit, or the metal is starting to wear down. The same cuff-style piece is also found on the legs, so keep this in mind when rotating the limbs. Constant rotation will most likely cause the articulation to go soft. Here you can see how the injection molded rubber has pushed itself into the hollow of the arm pieces, leaving behind little noodles that need to be pulled out of the arms in order to remove the rubber. So be mindful of this every time you go to articulate the figure. The internal workings are wound up with the armature, so every time you twist or turn a joint, you're pulling at the rubber mold. But what of the hip joint? Why did it fail? Simply put, there is no thread lock on the screw, and when you try to tighten it, the rear nut simply spins. I examined the screw under a magnifying glass and was able to see that there was none of the brown thread lock liquid on the screw or the nut. I tested this against the other screw, which I couldn't even get to budge. Eventually, I was able to work that screw out and could see quite a bit of thread lock in the threads of both the screw and the nut. But moreover, there was also a lot of rubber intrusion into the thread well. I wish both the screw and the nut were recessed, as that would have definitely limited the chance that it would start working itself free. All of the other joints are an eyelet pin design that has no moving parts, so once the pin has been pounded into place, it's there for good. That leaves the hips as the most likely joint on this figure to fail. So what do I think you should do if yours does start to fail? And it's outside of the return window, as once the screw has lost tension, the figure's legs will drift apart and stay in a slightly open position, rendering it useless for display. The nuts are found between the top end of the tail, which will feel like a hard square piece of plastic that breaks up the softness all around it. Directly in front on the opposite side are the screws. If you take a small X-Acto knife and a watch repair screwdriver, you can make a tiny incision and retighten the joints without the effects of the repair being too obvious, especially if you fill the tiny cut with a small amount of Loctite gel superglue. I have tested this on the other rubber parts, and it bonds really well without breaking the rubber down. In the end, it's a cool figure. I think unfortunately this might be a larger problem on the horizon, but maybe everyone else's figure will have an employee that didn't fall asleep on the job. Now lastly, I went ahead and removed the dome in order to cut the tabs and Dremel away a large piece of plastic obscuring the nose area of the skull. This allowed for me to move the entire head portion of the dome back slightly so that it looks more movie accurate and doesn't protrude as much. The only reason I did this was that I had one to tear apart. So copy this at your own risk. But I know that one of the big complaints is that large blob of plastic. This isn't actually glue, but a plastic tab that fits into the upper lip area in order to hold the dome in place. I know that this bothered a lot of people, so it is fixable, and the dome is made of a softer plastic, so it's fairly malleable and easy to get into place with a heat gun. I would like to take a moment to thank Big Bad Toy Store for making this video possible by both getting me a replacement quickly and allowing me to keep the damaged unit, which allowed me to suss out the problem. Now I hope you enjoyed this episode of Strange Form, and I hope it was informative and helped you better take care of your MEZCO figure. Now please hit like, subscribe, and comment. And remember, never stop collecting.